As an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the whole wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday, 0830 on the Eastern Seaboard, streaming to you live on Rumble. Rumble.com/AmRadPod is where you can find us here. And if you do find us, make sure you smash the like button and follow the channel. Always appreciate you guys getting there a little bit early, getting in the chat live and lively. Always a good time. If you listen to the podcast format on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart, any of those sorts, make sure that you subscribe there and give us a 5-star review so we can trick the algorithm into sharing the American Radicals Podcast with even more people out there as we endeavor to grow and expand and spread the knowledge. It is a Thursday, so the 59-minute rule is in effect, and real Steve Friend is going to be flying solo because at GOB Actual, Garrett O'Boyle, my co-host, is flying for real back from the Ivory City in Washington, D.C., where he had his appeal hearing in front of the court in his lawsuit against our ex-girlfriend at the FBI. And he will give us a full after-action review, hopefully on Saturday, noontime start there. So today I'm going solo, and I mentioned our ex-girlfriend, and that's the name of today's show, Our Ex-Girlfriend. It is going to be an FBI dunk session. I've got a lot of examples of weaponization that I want to get to. I know last time that I flew solo, I sort of gave a 30,000-foot view, the way the culture and the structure of the organization is just set up diametrically opposed to what most people have an expectation from our nation's premier, quote unquote, self-anointed premier federal law enforcement agency. And today I'm going to give you the receipts, the examples, and they range from the criminal to the counterterrorism, and counterterrorism and criminal also need to have quotes around them because they are not real violations of law, or if they are local violations of law that the FBI came in and adopted, and they are not real terrorist threats. They are the playbook that the FBI loves to run on its terrorism cases. So before we get into the specific examples, for anyone new, we have to have the qualifier in place today. What is the FBI playbook that I am referring to? The FBI playbook is very simple. Find a vulnerable person, someone who is emotionally disturbed, maybe lonely, a petty criminal, down on their luck, indigent, no resources, low IQ, very young. I'll say it because in our house, in the Friend household, we say gay, we say retarded, if you're retarded. And how do they find them? Well, they have their agents going out there. That's kind of hard, though. They have their agents going out into online spaces, a little bit easier. But really what they're leaning heavily on are the CHS, the confidential human source, the informant, the snitch. And the snitch can go out there physically or online and find that vulnerable person. And the snitch, again, is only paid by the FBI if they're productive, if they give them the vulnerable person that they can exploit. If they find that person and say, "Yeah, I'm gonna have a conscience about this person. I'm thinking that he could go wrong. He could pick a fork in the road, but I'm gonna encourage him to choose the better angels of his nature." They're not gonna get paid. So the CHS finds that target, and then the FBI grooms them and grooms them with the informant, with eventually introducing undercover assets, be they physical or online, and they encourage that person to do their worst ideas. Even if they don't have the ability to do it, even if they're not predisposed to do it, the FBI will push them and groom them until they agree, okay, I will go and do a terrorism. And then the FBI springs a trap. They clamp down on them, they arrest them for providing material support to terrorism. That's the FBI playbook, and that's what we're going to lean on when we get to our first few stories today. And this one I am really fired up about because it is the latest and greatest example of weaponization, and an example of how the FBI is willing to actually not only manipulate an individual, but put other individuals at risk just to get a headline, just to justify its budget, just to get its bonuses. So this was reported recently from the Department of Justice about the FBI. They had a U.S. Army soldier sentenced to 14 years in prison for attempting to assist ISIS to conduct deadly ambush on U.S. troops. That sounds really bad. Now, according to court documents, bad guy's name here is Cole Bridges. Bridges joined the U.S. Army in approximately September of 2019 and was assigned as a cavalry scout to the 3rd Infantry Division, the 3rd ID, based in Fort Stewart, Georgia, pretty close to my old stomping grounds in Savannah. Before he joined the Army, beginning in at least 2019, Bridges began researching and consuming online propaganda promoting jihadists and their violent ideology and began to express his support for ISIS and jihad on social media. Let's pause it there. Come full screen here. This is where you either know or you don't know what the language means from the FBI. If you don't know, you will think reading this, okay, makes sense. But if you do know, you know the manipulation that goes on. So I'll go back to one particular phrase. Before he joined the Army, beginning in at least 2019, in at least 2019. Well, that means that they were looking at him in 2019, and I overlooked it. He's 24 years old right now in 2024, which means that the FBI was looking at him as far back as when he was 19 years old. I don't have proof, but I would wager a healthy amount that they were looking at him before that, maybe before he was 18, maybe when he was a juvenile. And they were looking at him online, and they were looking at his online activities. What do you want to bet that they became aware of those because of a CHS, because of an informant? And that informant was grooming him. He didn't join the Army just because he wanted to be a patriot. Pretty clear that he's not. It's pretty clear that he has some sympathies for ISIS. And that's another issue. This guy, and in our house we say gay and retarded, in this guy, Cole, is so retarded that in 2019, he thought ISIS was a legitimate terrorist threat. How old were you when they were? That was back in 2014 when they were pushing and expanding their empire. They're forming the caliphate across the Middle East. That was when Barack Obama was president. And then the Donald Trump administration came in, and ISIS was no longer a threat in the region. But it's the most recent threat for young people, because young people who at that time would have been 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, ISIS was the big baddie that they knew about. They didn't know about Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. They're not old enough. They saw ISIS in the news. So that was what they latched onto, to reach out and push back and be an anti-establishment, make mom and dad really angry. I'm going to go look at ISIS, even though it wasn't a legitimate threat actor in the battle space. So that's what he did. And the FBI groomed him, or the informant for the FBI definitely groomed him. And he was doing this on social media. And then he decides to join the Army. Now, this is where the wrinkle comes in. The Army has a vetting process. If you're doing things on social media publicly, the Army would know about it. They would do a background check. Or when they were doing the background check, they would probably get a couple of red flags from the FBI saying, this is someone who's engaging in activities that are problematic and they are under some sort of an investigation, be it an assessment, a preliminary investigation, or an actual full counterterrorism investigation by the FBI. So we know that the Army got that notification, and yet he made it through. So now we have collusion between the United States Army, the Department of Defense, and the FBI out of the Department of Justice to make sure that this 19-year-old retard who is interested in ISIS, which isn't really a threat, but sounds really good on paper to him, make sure that he just tiptoes through the raindrops of the vetting process. Make sure that he gets to go to boot camp where they fire live ammunition on the firing range next to real patriotic Americans who decided to raise their hand and swear an oath to protect the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And for not even a moment did the FBI consider that he might have a moment of clarity in his retardation and think, I've got a rifle with live ammunition and I can just turn it on my fellow soldier right now. Sure, I'll go down, but I'm all down for the fight anyway. I'm all about jihad. I'm going to wake up with 70 virgins in paradise. But the FBI didn't consider that. They wanted to push him through so they could get the next level, so they could get to this splashy headline. So back to the story. So he joins the Army, or the FBI and the Army collude to make sure that he's able to join the Army. In about October of 2020, approximately 1 year after joining the Army, so he's through basic training, he's through special skills, Bridges began communicating with an FBI online covert employee. Wouldn't you know it, the playbook is in full effect, just organically. Old Cole Bridges just went online, and the first person he decided to talk to, dag nabbit, just happened to be an online covert employee for the FBI. What do you think the chances are that this was the first contact he had with the FBI? And then the FBI worked backwards through subpoenas and search warrants to find out his search history that somehow eluded the US Army's background check? Of course not. They groomed him, got him through the process, and then they introduced the online covert employee, OCE. And this person was posing as an ISIS supporter. Again, the retard thinks that there are other ISIS supporters out there and actually recruiters, because this guy, Cole, believed the online covert employee when he said, I'm an ISIS supporter and I'm in contact with ISIS fighters in the Middle East who don't exist. During these communications, Bridges expressed his frustration with the US military and his desire to aid ISIS. Bridges then provided training and guidance purported ISIS fighters who were planning attacks. He provided training and guidance to the purported ISIS fighters. So he provided the training and guidance to the FBI because he was not actually in contact with ISIS supporters or ISIS fighters. But it's written purported ISIS fighters so that if you don't know, you think he actually might have been in contact with ISIS, even though ISIS was. They were planning attacks, including he provided them advice about targets in New York City. He's not from New York. He's from Ohio, by the way, and he's living in Georgia, yet he knows about targets in New York City. He provided Army training manual and guidance about military combat tactics. In or about 2020 in December, he began to supply this online covert employee with instructions for the purported ISIS fighters, again, not real people, on how to attack US forces in the Middle East. Among other things, he diagrammed specific military maneuvers intended to help the ISIS fighters maximize their lethality against US troops, ways to ambush US special forces. He's not a member of US Special Forces. He wouldn't know anything about their combat tactics or techniques or vulnerabilities or capabilities or weaknesses or strengths. He's in the 3rd ID in Fort Stewart, Georgia. But he's going to tell them with authority that he knows how to take down the Special Forces. He's so retarded and has illusions of grandeur to the point where he thinks he's smarter than soft forces. Then in January 2021, he provided 2 videos to the online covert employee. one with his body armor where he's standing by an ISIS flag, and another one where he's using a voice manipulator and doing a propaganda speech in support of an anticipated ambush by ISIS of US troops. He was arrested, convicted, and now sentenced 14 years in prison. A couple things about the timeline. I mentioned earlier that in at least 2019 is when they became aware of him. It's likely that they became aware of him as a juvenile, but let's give it the best possible benefit of the doubt. The FBI happened to open up a case in 2019. It's now October of 2024, which means that they had this counterterrorism case of a person who was not capable of actually carrying out an attack open across 2019 fiscal year, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. 6 fiscal years of checking the box on an ISIS counterterrorism investigation, which were in high demand since around 2014. Now, this hits me pretty hard because I had a personal experience very much like this. And instead of doing what these guys did, I did the right thing. Because if this person, Cole, is so mentally deficient, emotionally disturbed, retarded, you're a mandated first reporter. You're supposed to make those recommendations to the local agency. But they didn't do that. They thought, ooh, this is fresh meat, vulnerable person. We're going to exploit him so we can get an arrest and push him to make the worst possible decision without giving away classified information. I had a very similar situation. My target was a female, and she was accused or alleged to be plotting some sort of bad act. Went and talked to her, and it was very apparent she was emotionally disturbed, had some mental problems, needed to be medicated. And then when I thought for a moment, I'm going to reach out to her away from this. Now that I've determined that she's not really a threat, and I had backup on that from supervisors in the FBI, from task force officers, from local agencies that agreed and concurred that this person was not a threat, I thought I'll go reach back out to her so that one day, maybe one day, if the doctor ever gets the mixture right and she gets to the haze lifts and she has a moment of clarity, she remembers that somebody from Uncle Sam came out and reached out and said, hey, I want good things for you. You're at a really pivotal point in your life. You can choose a path. You can go the wrong direction here, or you can go the right direction. It's up to you. I'm not making the decision for you. I'm just being clear and transparent that if you choose the wrong path, I'm the consequence. And I was discouraged from doing that. I was told by my FBI superiors that they wanted me to open an ISIS case on her anyway because we needed an ISIS case open for the quota system. Now, unlike these agents, I said no and didn't follow through on that. But these agents here followed through for 6 fiscal years. They're good Germans from Police Battalion 101. That is what this has devolved into. The FBI no longer views you as the customer, no longer views you as the citizen who they are duty-bound to protect against fraud and force and potentially terrorism. You're just an opportunity for them to target. Are you retarded enough? Are you desperate enough that we can get you to agree to do the worst possible thing that you aren't capable of doing so that we can put you in a cage and put out a press release? All right, deep breath. We got others to get to here in a second, guys. Before, it's kind of occurred to me, we've been sort of slacking on our sponsors. So I do want to thank today's sponsor, which is the M-Clip Company. Guys, go to m-clip.com, m-clip.com. And when you go there and you use the promo code SUSPENDABLE, you can get the money clips that they have there. This is an American company. It's family owned for a couple of decades, lifetime guarantee, luxury goods. They look really good. We're coming up. Hey, we're halfway through October already. Christmas season is a-coming. These are great gifts. You can get them. They can get your initials monogrammed on them. You can get your favorite baseball team, or I threw up the image before. I'll throw it up again. You can get the suspendable version with our badge and our logo, all of it. You can get 10% off if you use promo code SUSPENDABLE when you go to m-clip.com. All right. Going to go heavy on the counterterrorism today. That first one took a long time to get through, but I've got some other ones I definitely want to. And I'm a little bit partial to this one. It's not brand new. I think I've actually even talked about it before on the American Radicals podcast. Certainly have done it in other media formats. And I was a collaborator on this, or I was at least heavily influential on this piece by Lee Smith, who's a great writer, a great journalist who reached out to me because he wanted some clarity. He's actually following the Trevor Aronson type of plot, where he's looking at these FBI entrapments, but he's doing it as a conservative, whereas Trevor Aronson comes from the political left. So Lee Smith writes, and the piece is called "The FBI Entraps Another Fake Assassin." Now, what is this one about? Well, this is about the Pakistani national who came when had ties to Iran. And it was reported in the early days after the Butler failed assassination attempt of Donald Trump that there was potentially a tie to Iran because the FBI had arrested this guy. He had actually gotten arrested the day before. So the timeline doesn't really necessarily match up. He would have theoretically been arrested afterwards if there was a tie to Butler between Iran or this particular bad actor. But it was close enough that the FBI tried to slip it past the goalie. And more of the details on this guy. His name was Merchant, and he hailed from Pakistan, and the FBI, through the Department of Homeland Security and allowing the illegals to just flood across the southern border, they gave him essentially a parole to come into the country. They said that it was a public need. I think it was what they was basically characterized as. So the FBI Dallas field office sponsored Merchant's arrival at the southern border. Now, if he was plotting an assassination or a terrorist attack and the FBI had built up a case and knew that he was a bad guy and he was still existing in Pakistan or maybe in Iran, he'd be difficult to apprehend. Let's say he has the resources and he's capable of carrying out a bad act on us, on an individual, on an American, on a city, something to that effect. You could see them maybe sponsoring him to arrive here so that as he walked off and deplaned from the aircraft, they just surround him and handcuff him. I mean, he wouldn't be armed at that point, but in true FBI fashion, they probably throw a flashbang at his feet like a bunch of idiots. But he'd be arrested. He'd be on our hands. He's certainly a lot easier than to do it that way than to try to extradite somebody from Iran. But that didn't happen. So that leads me, being an investigator, an experienced investigator, to presume that they either one, did not have enough derogatory information, enough probable cause to arrest him on the spot. So they had to let him continue to operate in the interior of the country to build up that case, which has problems on alone, or they had enough, but still wanted him to operate so they could continue to expand the case out, lengthen it, keep it going, and then claim higher stats for themselves. Because if they had just arrested him at the border when he landed in Texas, it would have been a disruption of a terrorist action. But if he continued to operate in the interior and build out a network, an organization, a terror cell, well, now when you arrest him, it's not just a disruption. The FBI can claim what they call a dismantlement. A dismantlement is a highly coveted stat that they invent for themselves, where they say, we dismantled an entire criminal enterprise, an entire terrorism cell. We took it down, even though we created it. We facilitated its creation, which they did here, because Merchant, very much like Cole Bridges, was basically retarded. He went to New York and was in communication with informants and undercovers and had OPSEC that was inferior to a corner drug dealer. Back to the piece by Lee Smith. So last month, DOJ announced it had charged a Pakistani national with ties to Iran in connection to a plot to assassinate a politician or U.S. government official on U.S. soil. The suspect, Asif Merchant, entered the country in April and was arrested in July, 3 months later. The FBI arranged his entry into the U.S. According to an August Twitter post from Fox correspondent Bill Malugin, Merchant was admitted into the U.S. via parole for, quote, a significant public benefit. There you have CBP allowed him in. And they encountered him at the airport, and then he eventually flew into New York. Neither the affidavit nor the indictment make a strong case that Merchant is an experienced operative from Iran, nor is there any evidence of Merchant's ties to the Iranian regime. In fact, according to the affidavit, Merchant told undercover agents that, quote, the people who will be targeted are the ones who are hurting Pakistan and the world, the Muslim world. So nothing specific to Iran. Merchant offered, and this is where the retardation comes in, he offered $5,000. That was his ask. He wanted to have a sophisticated terrorism enterprise. I was going to say criminal, but it's a terrorism cell enterprise to operate in New York City, where he was going around, being driven around by undercovers to nightclubs to recruit hitmen to his cell. And he wanted to get dozens of people on board to carry out fake protests outside US politicians' houses or their apartments in New York. And under the cover of a protest, some other woman would sneak in Mission Impossible style and I guess descend from the ceiling on a rope and get classified material that these politicians just happen to have hanging around their house, because apparently they're all Joe Biden. They all have a Corvette in the garage with lots of classified material, and they would pick up the jump drives or the actual physical paper files and steal them from these US politicians' houses and then exfil away under the cover of these fake protests. And on top of that, then we would have a rolling, revolving door of assassination attempts on multiple US politicians, to include potentially Donald Trump. All of it for the price of $5,000. That's a retarded plot. That's an illusion of grandeur, of complexity that this guy had, that he thought he'd be able to pull that off. And again, back to the comparison to Cole Bridges, who was on a firing line with live ammunition next to American soldiers who he was theoretically plotting to kill when they were in theater. The FBI didn't consider that he might just turn to his left or his right and send a round into the back of the skull of a soldier. The FBI here with Merchant didn't consider for just a moment. Maybe Mr. Merchant would have had a moment where the haze lifted and he thought to himself, this is a logistical nightmare. This is too complicated. It's going to be too expensive. I don't even have the $5,000 that I think I'm going to be able to get this done with. I'll just grab a knife. I'm going to go kill an infidel. And then when I get off by a cop, I'll wake up in paradise. But the FBI didn't consider that, not even for a moment. Because again, they don't consider the American people their customer or the people that they swore an oath to protect. They're just the plebeian swine, the people they have to put up with, or at least some people they can target. There's at least some vulnerable people within there who we can target and encourage to do the worst possible thing, even though they're not capable of carrying it out, so that we can get our stats. And then our bosses can get their bonuses, which they do every single year, to between $30,000 and $50,000. Special agents in charge of all the field offices get because the quotas are met. Take a break, though, right now from the counterterrorism sphere. And let's pivot over to another person who probably not only deserves to be commuted or pardoned, but probably deserves a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Let's make this case. A Utah fraudster sentenced for selling 120,000 fake COVID-19 vaccination record cards. Details. Nicholas Scioto, 34, Salt Lake City, was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment, 3 years supervised release in order to pay the court $40,000 fine. According to court documents and statements made at his sentencing hearing between March of 2021 and September of 2021, he promoted, manufactured, sold, and distributed illegal and counterfeit COVID-19 vax record cards across the country. What a vile, vicious criminal. He enabled numerous people to use fake vaccination record cards to masquerade as being vaccinated. So what you're telling me is this guy saved potentially 120,000 Americans from taking the experimental gene juice that has resulted in died suddenly being the #1 cause of death for young adults at this point. I love the language, though. Masquerade as being vaccinated. So they could evade public health and safety protocols. You mean the safety protocols that said that you had to shut down your non-essential business and stay home and stay safe, and then put a diaper on your face, and then get a stimmy check because you couldn't afford your mortgage or to feed your family because your non-essential business wasn't allowed to be open, meanwhile Amazon and Walmart were, and then walk down one-way aisles in the grocery store to spend your stimmy check. You mean those protocols? Or you mean when the president said his patience was wearing thin and that this was going to be a winter of death because of the unvaccinated? CO2 engaged in this scheme without regard for any public consequences or risks. I think he probably did. I think he probably thought, I'm saving over 100,000 of my fellow citizens. This guy's a freaking hero. And yet he's going to rot in prison for 12 months. He deserves a full pardon. He deserves to keep the money. We let all these PPP fraudsters out there to the tone of billions and billions of dollars, these forgivable loans. And this guy has entrepreneurial spirit to say, hey, look, I'm going to provide a product that people want, need, and desire, and is actually going to save their lives, provably. But the US government, led by the FBI, decided to put him in a cage for a year for having the temerity to go out there and do this. This guy's a hero. He sold each one of these things for $10. $10 to save your life. And he was so entrepreneurial that he said you have to buy a minimum of 10 because he knew people would buy it for their family and their friends. Only one person would buy it, and then they'd share it. He deserves a Medal of Freedom. I guess I'll probably be censored over that one here, but I'll say it anyway. Don't ask me a question if you don't want to know the truth. All right, we're going to go back to counterterrorism. This one is, again, back to the playbook, back to the vulnerable, low intelligence person, back to the retard. Somerset County man sentenced to 64 months incarceration for concealing material support to Hamas. Now, Hamas is a legitimate threat to Israel. But what would happen here? This guy's name is Jonathan Xie, Xie. I think it's pronounced Xie. He knowingly concealed and disguised the nature, location, source, ownership, and control of his attempt to provide material support and resources to Hamas. All right. So he tried to send a bunch of money to Hamas. What did he do? Well, according to the court documents and according to this press release from the Department of Justice, and the FBI got heavily involved in this case, all the way back in December of 2018. Check a calendar, guys. Check a calendar. Almost 6 years ago. Xi sent $100 via MoneyGram to an individual in Gaza who he believed to be a member of Hamas that has conducted attacks. We don't know if that's a real person or if that's an informant. It's not provided here. So I won't presume facts that are not in evidence. Let's assume that he was actually sending money to a member of Hamas. He sent him $100. In April of 2019, he appeared in an Instagram live video wearing a black ski mask and stated that he was against Zionism and the neoliberal establishment. When asked by another participant in the video if he would go to Gaza and join Hamas, he said, yes, if I could find a way. So he couldn't get there. He didn't know how, didn't realize he could get on an airplane, or he at least had enough common sense to realize if he got on an airplane and showed up there, they'd behead him. But he said he was down for the fight. Later in the video, he displayed a Hamas flag and stated, I'm going to go to the bleep pro-Israel march. So he's an activist. He wants to go march in the streets. He doesn't want to actually fight. So he sent $100. And then flash forward back to April 19, he sent a link to a website for the Al-Qassam Brigades, that's part of Hamas, to an FBI employee who was acting online in an undercover capacity. What, he just happened to find the one online undercover, the one FBI online covert employee who was his only friend? Or was he sending this out in mass and just happened to, I don't know, come across the desk of an FBI employee? No, of course not. Before that, he was in contact with an informant who then introduced him to the FBI online covert employee, or the FBI online covert employee reached out directly and poked and prodded with him in April of 2019. But we have intel that he sent the $100 in 2018. So they might have been looking at him back in those days, 6 years ago. Now, furthering on into the story, let's find out how did he, because he's not charged with material support. He's charged with attempting to conceal that he gave or wanted to give material support to ISIS. So he tells this online undercover employee he described a website as a Hamas website and stated he had previously sent a donation to the group, which we know about. He then sent screenshots of the website to the FBI employee and demonstrated how to use a new feature on the website that allows donations to be sent via Bitcoin. So by saying you can use cryptocurrency to conceal your donations to a terrorist organization, that's the attempt in April of 2019. So we're in April of 2019 in fiscal year 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. Six fiscal years they had on this guy for saying that you can send a Bitcoin donation to Hamas. And they put him in prison, put him in a cage for over 5 years. I don't think that I would get along really well with Mr. G, the same way I really wouldn't get along with Mr. Bridges or Mr. Merchant. But these are not organic, authentic terrorism cases. And the Bitcoin angle is something else that's worth even a brief discussion of, because in the latter days of my FBI employments, when Bitcoin was kind of catching on, there were some trainings that we had to go to that were like an hour long. They were so, the hubris of the FBI was, we can teach you all about Bitcoin in 60 minutes. And the advertised concern is going to be that bad guys can conceal their donations to a terrorist organization, or they can launder their illicit proceeds from selling drugs using cryptocurrency. So again, we're going to be back to the tool is the problem, right? The gun is the problem because it can be used for evil. But that's illogical. A lock is a useful tool. I lock up my car because I don't want people to steal the objects inside of it or steal the car. But because I can use a lock to imprison someone, we got to ban locks. Same thing goes with the gun. It's illogical. Same thing goes with cryptocurrency. But we're going to be sure to throw Bitcoin in there, at least until the United States Treasury comes out with FedCoin and then mandates that we all transition to a fiat, a national federal cryptocurrency. It's coming, folks, particularly if the election goes the way that I believe it will this November. I'm going to pivot again. We're going to stay again in the counterterrorism national security sphere. And this one was more recent than the merchant one. This was, I believe, last week, but my schedule, guys, is all screwed up from the hurricane. I don't really even know what day it is, other than that I know that we go on the American Radicals podcast on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Reminder, if you haven't already here on Rumble, that you smash the thumbs up and follow the channel. So it is a Thursday, and hurricane was last week, so we recorded early. I believe this was last week, and this is about one of the parolees that came across from Afghanistan, one of the 100,000 parolees that the United States government allowed in when we had the disastrous withdrawal in 2021. So this is, again, an ISIS plot. So whenever you see ISIS now, connect ISIS with retard. According to a criminal complaint filed today, Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi, age 27, conspired and attempted to provide material support, there it is, to ISIS and obtained firearms and ammunition to conduct a violent attack on the U.S. soil. So the FBI looks into this guy who we've paroled into the country without a background check. They searched his phone and obtained communications between Tawhidi and a person who facilitated recruitment, training, and indoctrination of persons who expressed interest in terrorist activity and who Tawhidi understood to be affiliated with ISIS. That is very, very cloaked language. That was not a person who worked for ISIS. People don't work for ISIS who were going to be talking to Tawhidi. That was an informant. Let me reread it and tell me if this was an actual person who was recruiting for ISIS, recruiting people in Oklahoma to go to work for ISIS, would they be described accurately this way? The FBI searched his phone and obtained communications with a person who facilitated recruitment, training, and indoctrination of persons who expressed interest, so a recruiter, in terrorist activity and who Tawhidi understood to be affiliated with ISIS. The devil is in the details. He believed it, so it might as well have been true. It wasn't true, but he believed it to be true. So that's good enough for us. So this guy, Tahiti, starts liquidating assets, and he's going to plan some sort of an attack. We'll go back to the press release. Well, liquidating their family's assets prior to the attack, which we don't yet have details about, he and his co-conspirator, who was a child, by the way, advertised the sale of the family's personal property on Facebook. At the FBI's direction, a confidential human source, the snitch, responded to ask if the computer was for sale. The FBI snitch noted that he needed the computer for a new gun business he was starting. And we are back in the full swing of things. The Facebook is at play, guys, because we have found a vulnerable person. We found our retard. And we're going to push him to do his worst ideas. And we're going to facilitate it for the exact amount of money that he has, because we've already subpoenaed his records. And we're going to plant these seeds in him in the most absurd way possible. Can I have your computer? Can I buy it from you? Oh, by the way, I'm just going to mention this out of hand. I'm starting a gun shop. Don't you need guns? Which is exactly what this retard fell into the trap for, because he's not a sophisticated person. And he said, oh, you're selling guns? I'd like to buy a gun. And now we have an additional charge, because if the FBI can't get you on providing material support, they're at least going to get something. And roping you into a gun plot, Fed 101. That was what I was told, at least, when I was moved over to work on counterterrorism cases to focus on domestic terrorism. And I said, I have no background in national security work. And they told me that I was uniquely qualified. Well, you're going to have to square that circle for me. They said, well, this is really the criminal side of terrorism. And you've got lots of experience in criminal, violent crime, Steve. So you're the unique person that we need to fill this role. It's not that you have a 98.6 degree temperature and 2 arms and 2 legs. Any old agent will do here. No, you are uniquely qualified for this. And I said, why? They said, well, when you work in this space, you get lots of gun cases. Huh. Are you investigating illegal gun sales? Are you investigating people who are making illegal purchases? Oh, no, you're just pushing them to engage in those activities so that you can come down and get them with a gun charge if you can't get the material support to terrorism. Back to our Mr. Tahiti. So he goes about making this deal, and they arrest him on scene because the FBI can't allow him to get those guns. Tahiti expressed an interest in purchasing an AK-47 assault rifle, clearly written by a DOJ employee, a magazine, and ammunition from the source. And then the final couple of bits here that I do think are worth going into were that this arrest of Tahiti happened on a very specific date, October 7th, 2024, the 1-year anniversary from October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel. October 7th, it's got to the point now where it's like January 6th, September 11th, July 13th. Well, we'll forget about that one because that involved a potential assassination of Donald Trump. But October 7th, everyone knows. And the FBI and the intelligence community put out all of these cautions, right? They said, be on the lookout. There could be an anniversary day attack, which never happens because terrorists don't care about anniversary dates. The only people who do are the intel analysts who write term papers for a living. They see significance there. Again, personal anecdote. I was told that be on the lookout for school shootings happening on Valentine's Day because that was the day of the Parkland shooting. Of course, we got this intel on February 15th, the day after, and there were no attacks. So I remember responding, well, is it coming in 364 days or did you guys just miss that one? But this is what they were pushing, and the FBI didn't deliver on a real attack happening, but they can claim, well, we stopped an attack from happening on that date, even though that attack wasn't planned for that day, if you actually read into the press release. The press release says that Mr. Tahiti was planning an election day attack, which is going to be the next caution. Mark it down, mark the tape. 45 minutes into this episode, Steve Friend saying it. In addition to the hospitals have to report all the coronaviruses that are breaking out, you should probably stay home and not go to the polling places. The FBI now is going to have, we've thwarted an attack, but we can't guarantee that there won't be more soft targets at polling locations. You should probably not go vote. You can mail in your ballot, but it might be too late to get one at that point. They'll accept them late, of course, because the people who already have them and just haven't figured out the day to mail it in on time, they're all going to vote for Kamala Harris, allegedly. But the FBI now has a narrative that they're continuing. They continued the October 7th narrative, and now they're going to push the next one, and that is threats on election day at the polling locations. Now, I promised we would venture into the criminal sphere because I have a lot of them, and I think it's worth. Let's just do this for laughs, guys, because again, the manipulation that happens if you don't read into the actual press release, if you just read the headline. And I know that people on this program who enjoy the American Radicals podcast, you want to consume the additional information, but you have to understand that you are the splinter on the twig of the branch of the tree of people, the very small tree that exists in the forest of all people out there. And our tree is people who like to consume current events, but people don't want to get into the details like we like to give them to you here. So I know I'm a little bit preaching to the choir. I know I'm like the basketball coach who's watching his team get rolled on the floor and then turns around and starts yelling at the bench players because he has no one else to explain it to. I know you know, but let's go into it anyway. And you can at least share this with some of the people in your sphere, other people in the tree who are not quite as read into the file. So this is about a Peruvian woman who was sentenced to 15 years for selling 1.5 kilos of meth to an undercover officer. So Nancy Teresen was a judge. I'm sorry. Our bad guy's name is Mandy Shorey. She's going to do 180 months, which is always fun because you have to do the conversion. The federal system likes to sentence you to months. That's 15 years. So according to court records, and this happened July of 2022 to January of 2023, she sold 1.5 kilos of meth to an undercover officer, not an undercover FBI agent. During one of the buys, she explained that she carried a firearm with her. So she wanted protection, and that's having a gun while you're committing a felony. That's an additional charge that the feds can come in with. She had a .22 revolver with her. So a pretty brief story, but I did pause for a moment. If you noticed on the time, July 22nd to January 2023, which again, fiscal year. The FBI took credit from local authorities on this one because a local officer was undercover, not an FBI agent, and adopted this case and then took credit for it. And you go back to fiscal year 2022, 2023, 2024, and we're now in 2025, 4 fiscal years for 4 drug buys by a local officer. And the FBI has now been able to drag it out as long as they possibly can to make sure that they're hitting their quotas across those 4 fiscal years. We'll talk about armed robbery. And this one did require a little bit of additional research on my part. And when I say a little bit, I mean a Google search, and I went to page 2. So hardly in-depth analysis and investigations by me, but I guess that's more than most FBI agents can do. Now, the headline of the press statement says a trio responsible for 8 armed robberies of an Indianapolis area cell phone stores were sentenced to a combined 65 years of federal prison. So they didn't get 65 years each, but the FBI likes 65 better than roughly 20 years is what they got. According to court documents, these robberies happened from November to December of 2021. Now we got 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, 5 fiscal years that our bad guys were robbing these cell phone stores. Well, did the FBI take 5 years to track them down like a dog with a bone? Or did local police do this? And then the FBI just came in after the fact. Oh, local news reports. Comes from wishtv.com. It looks like a local news affiliate. IMPD, Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. 6 arrested, 1 sought after a series of armed robberies at cell phone stores. They arrested them in 2022 early because the robberies happened in late 2021. They've been in custody the entire time. And yet the FBI stretched it out and is now taking credit, not even letting the public know that the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, their detectives, their actual criminal investigative division, did the necessary investigative work to find out who did these robberies, locate them, and arrest them. And they were armed robberies. These guys were dangerous. So the real police put their lives on the line to bring these people into custody. And the FBI just scooped in and adopted the case and is now saying, "You're welcome, America. We got them away in federal prison for a combined 65 years." This one, I don't even know if you can consider it national security or criminal or civil. But let's get to it just because it's good eating. And I'm looking up now at the time and realizing that there's not a chance in the world that I'm going to be able to get through it. So maybe we'll have to have a part due on this one. Maybe another day that Garrett has to go and go fight in the appeals court for his job back against the our ex-girlfriend over at the FBI. But this one is just kind of a head scratcher of why are federal resources being used for this? And let's talk about a custody dispute that the FBI felt necessary to jump on. According to court documents, evidence presented at trial, it went all the way to trial. This is a long name. Her name is Ajo Dorcas Manu Epsi Asoko, age 46, and John Franklin Asoko, who were then legally married and living in Maryland, gave birth to a child in Washington, D.C. Ajo filed for divorce from John in December of 2023. Ajo obtained a protective order against John. She basically lied and said that he was committing domestic violence against her, and the court defaulted to give her full custody of the child. Now, was later the protective order was lifted because it was rescinded. It was proved that John wasn't engaging in any sort of domestic violence. That is not unusual for these contentious divorce and child custody proceedings, that these allegations will be thrown out there. So now we go to April 30th, 2024. Ajo, the female, and the child flew from Dulles in Washington, D.C. to France. She's French. And then to some French city. Ajo did not inform John that she was leaving the country with their child and did not contact him after they departed. He's now has visitation rights of the child. On May 3rd, 2024, at the time John's next scheduled visitation window was to take place, Ajo and the child had not returned, so she denied him his ability to visit with the child because she went to France and didn't tell him. So he missed out on visiting with the baby. So now we're going to get into really petty disputes, right? This is when the custody disputes, we got to go back to court because you deprived me of my meat and I want my entire schedule amended here, and only the lawyers profit off of this. I've heard a while ago, and it's pretty true, that when you go to a criminal trial, criminals look their best at criminal trial, and families who are generally good people, they look their worst at civil trial involving disputes and divorce. But May 7th, 2024, John filed an emergency motion for temporary sole custody. He wants the baby, and he wants mom to not have any access. On May 9th, Montgomery County Circuit Court held a hearing on that motion, which Ajo attended via Zoom because she was still in France. After she refused the court's opportunity to bring the child back, she said, "I'm not coming back. Ollie, Ollie, oxen free. I'm in France. Come and get it." So that John could have his visitation rights, the court entered an order and gave temporary primary custody of the child to John. But the problem is the baby's still in France with mom. In June, Ajo, our wife, our ex-wife, flew from France to Dulles and left the child behind. There must have been an understanding that she was going to bring the baby and that we can get this all worked out. But instead, she left the baby behind in the care of family members. The FBI learned that she booked a flight out of Dulles. They arrested her, and they got her before she could board the flight back to France. She refused to tell the agents the child's location or the names of the relatives in whose care the child had been left. So a sad story. But again, I go back to, is this an FBI involved case? Is this really truly an international kidnapping scam? No, it's a custody dispute. And there's been no actual violence or mistreatment or maltreatment of the child alleged. In fact, the only allegation who came from the wife has been discredited. That probably makes her a dirtbag of a person. All these people that you'll notice, they're not people that I'd want to be friends with. They're not people I'd want to live my kids with. But they're not people that the FBI should be putting in a cage. Particularly this one, when it is emotions rung high, it's a divorce, it's a custody dispute, it's an international custody dispute. She just wants to go back to Europe and live there. She made a mistake, or maybe he made a mistake. I don't know. I'm not involved in their affairs. But there needs to be some sort of mediation between the parties here. They're trying to work towards it, but that's a difficult path to chart, because of the emotional aspect to it, because of the logistical aspect to it. They're not the first couple that's ever had to undergo it. I believe we probably have some sort of precedent for what we can do, and you would hope that cooler heads would prevail, but you can't promise it. The FBI has no place in it, though. The FBI shouldn't be putting this person in prison because she took her own child to see her family. Again, not a great person, but a misappropriation of resources on the FBI's stance. And I said before that I've got a bunch of other ones to get to, and we are rapidly closing in on the end of the show. And I don't have a biblical worldview because I need Garrett to do that for me. So I'm going to have him back on. But let's just do a couple of rapid fire ones that I do think are worth saying. And these come because I love to dig into social media accounts by the FBI. And this is where I get a lot of my source material for today's show and others like it. And the FBI is super woke, right? So the FBI Jobs X profile wanted to acknowledge World Mental Health Day. They highlighted the importance of vital support systems. I brought that up because mental health, the FBI now gives all employees 3 paid hours a week to work on their mental health. And if you bring forward a whistleblower disclosure, they encourage you to go to the employee assistance program, which is for your mental health. And if you go, then they call you crazy and discount your whistleblower disclosure. And if you don't go, they say that you're refusing to participate and go after you for that. So it's a Kafka trap. FBI Cleveland, happy World Coming Out Day, because we're celebrating Global Gay Days, because in my house, we say gay and retarded. FBI Cleveland just wanted to make sure you all had a happy World Coming Out Day. Can't help but notice that happened on October 11th, the day after 10/10, which is XX, which is Women's Sports Day, which I'm not necessarily opposed to because of all the men that are taking women's positions in sports. That was the day. But the FBI didn't acknowledge that, even though they're all about girl bosses now. That conflicts with the rainbow kamikaze, tranny madness message that they're pushing out. So they didn't acknowledge that. They acknowledged World Coming Out Day instead. And then we recently had Columbus Day, and the FBI did not acknowledge that, even though they took the day off for the federal holiday. They all stayed home. No acknowledgement from the FBI. They did, however, put out this nice video from FBI Chicago. Give it a play. There is no audio here, but it's about the Chief Shabona Preserve, which is in Illinois. And as the FBI Chicago field office tells you, is the only reservation in the state of Illinois, but it's a nature preserve. So there's no people who live there, which is why FBI Chicago and FBI Springfield, which handles the rest of the state of Illinois, they don't investigate Indian country crimes. But we had to make sure we put that out there because it's Columbus Day, and the FBI wants to make sure that you know that they know that they shouldn't be recognizing Christopher Columbus and the arrival of Western civilization to the North American continent, because that's what we do. All right, guys, I got a palate cleanse for you because the FBI is evil and they're awful, and they need to be shattered into 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind because they don't do real law enforcement. But I can tell you somebody who does. And this is my favorite cop of all time. Garrett has seen the video. He agreed and concurred, but I wanted to give it a play today to give it full recognition. This is how real law enforcement should be done in the alleged land of the free.
How we doing, officer?
Good about yourselves.
All right. Officer Hernandez from the Sandusky Police Department.
Yes, sir.
The one and only reason I'm out here right now is the lady in there called us and just had some concerns about people videotaping out here.
Sure.
Obviously, you guys are out here on a public sidewalk. You're not doing anything illegal. You're not engaged in disorderly conduct. You're not being a voyeur or anything else like that. You're simply two gentlemen walking around just videotaping the city.
Yes, sir.
And we're a tourist town. That happens everywhere here in this city.
Of course.
Just some folks might have either feel some sort of way about it because they're being videotaped or whatever the case may be. We don't have any control over that. You guys aren't doing anything illegal by being out here in the city. So, again, if you don't mind me asking, and you don't have to answer, are you guys with a multimedia company or are you guys just private citizens doing your own thing?
No, that's it. My name's Jason. This is my son, Ben.
How you doing, Ben?
And
I'm Ernie.
Ernie, pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure
Officer
to meet you as
Hernandez,
well.
Ernie. You prefer Ernie?
Nah, a lot of people just call me Ernie.
You got it.
That, sometimes titles are only good for books and movies.
Well, and good small town vibes, right?
And that too.
How we doing, officer?
Ernie is my favorite cop of all time. That's the way it's handled. That's somebody who actually takes his oath of office seriously, his commitment to constitutional rights, civil rights seriously. Handle that A+ for Ernie. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. We'll be back with you on Thursday at noontime here on Rumble, rumble.com/amradpod. Garrett will be back with me, and we will have fun, maybe get an after-action report on his experience at the Ivory City of Washington, D.C. Ooh, should be a good one. And we'll see you then. Until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amrad.